Hello, I'm XPLovecat, and today we're diving into a Pulp Cthulhu scenario, which is incredibly action-packed and includes a ticking time clock. Waiting for the Hurricane is one of the intro scenarios included in the Pulp Cthulhu rules supplement, and it was a really nice intro to this rule set if it's something that you haven't played before. This is a one-shot scenario taking my players and I about 4 hours to complete. It takes place in Key West in 1935 during the Labor Day hurricane, which was actually a real historical event where a Category 5 hurricane hit the Keys, causing significant damage. The basic setup is the road from Key West to the other Keys has collapsed, and if that wasn't bad enough, the action pops off really quickly when they start to hear gunshots in the hotel that they're staying at. Now from this point forward, there will be major spoilers as I walk through the scenario and give you my top tips for running it. First, we have Douglas Whiting, who is a Deep One hybrid who actually escaped from a raid that happened in Innsmouth about 7 years ago. He made contact with Ruthyla, which is a Deep One city in the Puerto Rico Trench. However, when we're learning the truth that Whiting abandoned his Deep One brethren to save his own skin, he was exiled until he was able to make reparations to his race and god, Cthulhu. He decided the best way to do this was to make a cult himself, and he generally picked people who were more rich and powerful and who would be willing to trade offerings for gold from the Deep Ones. The cult received visions that this hurricane was coming, so his brilliant plan was to use this hurricane as a cover for a Wave of Oblivion spell in which he would destroy all of Key West and the people with it as a extra great offering for Cthulhu. And the second important person here is Hector Mendez, who was a part of the cult, but once he really realized what was going on and this great plan that was being established, he no longer wanted to be a part of this weird cult. And he ended up stealing the gold tablet that was necessary to get this entire thing, Wave of Oblivion, to work. And he was going to run away, but then the road collapsed, so then he was stuck in Key West just like everyone else. Now you can bet that the other cultists were not happy when they found out that he was a traitor. My key tips before you start playing is number 1, ask your players what their birthdays are, which will correspond with their appropriate zodiac signs. This will be a great opportunity in case the cultists decide they need that particular sign and can't find it from others on the island. Then the next step is to make a key for yourself of the different NPCs that are being kidnapped with their appropriate zodiac signs and the PC zodiac signs as well, just so you have that visualization, one that you could give to your players, but also too so it can help you keep track of who's who and what signs everyone is. Also pay close attention to the box describing the weather and the rules for transportation, being outside in the weather, describing the weather, and making this a big atmospherical funness for your players, because after all, it is during a hurricane. The first key location for the scenario is the Grand Hotel. Now, my tip for you here is to have a place set up for shelter for residents, as the hotel is a really strong structure and some people may opt to leave their homes and come to the hotel instead. So one, this offers a little bit more atmosphere and accuracy to when a storm would come through, but also it offers an opportunity for your players to roleplay with locals and get information from them if necessary. Another really useful thing that I did before we started playing was, one, establish why everyone is in Key West, but also have them pick on the map where they are in the Grand Hotel. So this map was actually really helpful. I had one printed out and it was in the center of our table, and we were able to mark it up and have discussions and able to visualize where everyone is, and then once the action got going, where each of those enemies and cultists were as well. So definitely print out the map and have some sort of thing that you can write on for it, and have everyone pick out where they are so that you can have each of those individual investigators hear certain things or see certain things, and they might each only get an individual piece or clue, and then once they come together, the full story will all kind of coalesce and be helpful for your players. A bit of a story of how this first section worked for my players. The men in black, or the cultists that came in, there were 3 of them. 2 of them were killed by my players, one of which had a death ray, which was a lot of fun and something that's unique to Pulp Cthulhu that you wouldn't traditionally see in regular Call of Cthulhu. And then one of the cultists actually got away with a sacrifice. So within all this chaos, my players didn't actually think to call the police, so I had a manager ask them to call the police instead, and what they heard on the other line was chaos and gunshots and not clarity as to what the situation was at the police station. This was intended to be a lead for them to go to the police, but they didn't bother to bite on that lead, and so I tell this story to let you know to be flexible with your leads, and you might have to change things up. So how I adjusted for this, as they spent their time mostly calming people down, getting people healed up, first aiding, doing those sort of things and staying in the hotel, I had them at night, once they went to sleep, do some luck rolls and listen rolls, as one of them was getting kidnapped because they had an appropriate sign that the cultists needed. Once I had at least 2 of the investigators in the midst of this chaos that was happening and outside, I had Mendez running down the street. So then that was a clue for them to hopefully help that person. What happened is the investigator went and got into a car and was chasing them, but they weren't very successful at driving the car. Go back to the weather rules, and they ended up hydroplaning and going into a pole, and unfortunately not great things happened to their car. So the one thing to make sure is to give them a lead or something that they can grab onto, even if they don't end up successfully following Mendez or successfully interacting with him right away. So before the player left and went back to the hotel, I made sure that she saw Mendez go into the cemetery. So that was a clear lead for the next day. Now, don't worry, my player did not end up getting kidnapped, but if they do, the scenario is short enough and more action-packed enough that you could play with that, and I think everything would work out in the end, even if you do have a investigator get kidnapped. Once they make their way to the Key West Cemetery, be prepared for a chase. So you might have some notes written down about different obstacles, and they do a good job of listing those in the book. So just kind of have those on hand in case you get into a chase situation. But in my case, since the chase had already happened, I did keep Mendez alive, and he was hiding in a mausoleum, so that might be an alternate opportunity if the time has passed for the chase. And of course, if Mendez does die, you have a couple backup plans, which is possibly a cultist that was caught alive that could give some tips as to the island location, or some notes in Mendez's house if the investigators make their way there. And the final location is Wisteria Island. Now, you might be prepared for another chase if the sacrifices are on a boat making their way to the island. However, if your players dilly-dallied a little bit like mine did, the sacrifices are actually already at the island, so it's just a matter of getting there safely. Even though my players did recruit Mendez to pilot the boat because he has such a great piloting boat skill, he actually still did fail the roll. So I made my players do a dex roll, and if they did not succeed, they fell into the water, which can be quite hazardous, particularly considering how intense the waves would be during this storm. If you do include this part in the scenario, I would just recommend not killing your investigators at this particular point. It's more just to add fun and immersion to the game as they're in this chaos of a storm, but not really particularly to kill them. So just keep that in mind. Mendez can always throw out a life preserver, and you can roleplay them getting out back on the boat and successfully making their way to the island. Now, when they actually get to the temple and start this massive fight, it can be a little bit tricky for keepers to keep track of everything. I mean, there's a lot of cultists and deep ones and whatever else might be happening at that particular time. Sacrifices, all this nice junk going together that might make it a little bit tricky. So remember, half the cultists are going to continue chanting, so you don't have to play for them. To the other half that are going to engage in combat, I would definitely recommend having them go all at once, just for bookkeeping. It's a lot easier. But also, a lot of the cultists will stay and be very protective of the sacrifices, so there might only be 5 or 6 that you're actually making individual rolls for every turn. And again, this is a part where the temple map was super helpful, so make sure you have that printed out as well. It's going to help everyone know what the layout looks like and where different people are located. It might be helpful to use different figures or pennies, paper clips, whatever you have to mark where people are, and you can move them around as well if you wanted to get a little bit more intense with this map layout. Now, my investigators ended up being unsuccessful at taking on all of these cultists, and they fled instead. One investigator almost died, but used its just a scratch to save himself to get 1d6 of hit points back. However, they didn't realize that fleeing would just result in their death anyway, and the hurricane ended up coming, as well as the wave of oblivion, and completely obliterating Key West. Hopefully your investigators do a little bit better job than mine did. Overall keeper tips for this scenario is 1, make sure that you have the right group to play this, as it is extremely action oriented and very little role play. So as long as you know that your group enjoys that type of play or wants to try something a little bit different, then you're good to go, because really it's just find Mendez and go. Those are your 2 steps. Next overall tip is to be flexible and have backup plans. So making sure that you have different ways to give these leads and a different opportunity for them to encounter Mendez. You can also do a little bit more improv about what the cultists are doing to cause chaos, as well as perhaps kidnapping some of the investigators. My overall thoughts on the scenario is I thought it was a pretty good intro to the Pulp rule set. So it had a lot of opportunities to use the rules in Pulp that aren't in the core Call of Cthulhu game. So if this is new to you, I think that this is a great first option. That being said, for me personally, it was a bit combat heavy, and I think that Pulp can still be used for a mix of combat and roleplay, whereas this didn't really have any roleplay in it. So just be aware of that as you're going into it, and let your players know that it is heavy action oriented and that Pulp doesn't necessarily have to be all action. I really enjoyed the story, the background of the Deep One hybrid and him creating his own cult, as well as it taking place during the Labor Day hurricane, and that actually happened. So I thought this was overall a very enjoyable scenario. We had a ton of fun with it, and I actually enjoyed that my players failed because it makes for a great story. If you enjoy my videos on Pulp Cthulhu or regular Call of Cthulhu, then I do have a Patreon page, and I appreciate all the support and for you watching my videos. It's really encouraging, and it also is fun to make these videos, and I'm saving to hire an editor to kind of help me bring them to the next level and the higher quality as well. So thank you so much for watching. Bye.